In the dry period between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, there was an ARPG instant cult classic released in 2005 known as Fate. Welcome to Beating My Inner Child, a series where I play games from my childhood, sometimes to see if the nostalgia is valid, and other times just to see if I can get further than kid me ever dreamed of. I was in elementary school when Fate came out, but I still remember it fondly. The local Staples had computers with the Wild Tangent client that Fate was on, and you could play a free trial. Every time my mom took me, I looked forward to starting a new character and seeing how far I could get before she inevitably pulled me away and took me home. As a kid, I probably only ever experienced the first couple floors, but I vividly remember fishing up a cheese hat, and I honestly probably fished more than I ever went in the dungeon. I even had a friend at the time who also played it at Staples, and at school we would compare how far we'd each gotten. Simpler times, simpler pleasures.
Within these walls lies the path to infinite adventure. It is here that you will test your worth, and perhaps find fortune and glory along the way. It is here that you will determine your fate.
I didn't remember there being other races or pets. I think because it was a free trial, or because this is a remake, these might not have been available to me. I chose to stay with a human and a dog for this run, to keep it as close to how I remembered it. I put it on legendary difficulty, expecting my modern RPG class building capabilities and ARPG experience to make the game a breeze. Instantly regret set in, as I had to start kiting on the first floor and letting my pet handle most of the work. Luckily, none of the mobs in the game are faster than the main character, allowing anything to be kited with ease. I didn't realize just how much this foreshadowed all of my gameplay to come. I spent my initial levels in strength, hoping to go an Ooga Booga Dark Souls-esque strength build, but legendary mode had me feeling weak. Ended up getting a fish that changed my pet into a spider as a drop, and combined that with a new spider summon from an in-dungeon merchant, and all of a sudden I was considering going full poison build. I already felt like I had delved deeper into the core gameplay than I ever did as a kid. I should have realized at this time that this would lead to the overall game feeling quite shallow. Like a 30-year-old man in a kiddie pool, I was unable to fully immerse myself for long. My starting RNG was ridiculously good, to the point where I was questioning if they'd made the game easier in the remake. 2 sets of perfect gems in a row, followed by my first attempt at fishing, which resulted in a flawless Gurnard. A fish that transformed my pet into a great tuskhorn. At this point, I did search to see if this was rare, and found that while not exceptionally so, it was considered the best pet form in the game due to its incredibly high stats, and due to being flawless, it would indefinitely transform my pet. The game from this point became less and less about my contribution, and more about how I could help my pet be a success. I was a side character in my own campaign. I was the Mandalorian, and my dog was Baby Yoda. I started flying through levels, just watching my pet one-tap everything that got close, while I sat back and reaped the rewards. Money and fame just kept rolling in, not to mention XP. As even if it's just killed by the pet, you still get full XP. I attempted to support my pet with summons, investing heavily in charm magic skill, only to find that most of the time, they just got in my pet's way. So I started looking into the defensive magic skill instead, focusing on auras that applied to my pet as well, hoping that by doing this, I was still considered as playing the game. I do want to admit at this point that many of my complaints stem from my own actions. Putting the game on legendary difficulty in an attempt to flex on past me was silly, and probably not the recommended difficulty for one's first run, considering the game has a retirement system that encourages multiple playthroughs. Also, after realizing just how OP the pet was, I could have changed it to a different form to limit myself to a more normally paced progression. But instead, I chose to push into the flaws of the game, turning what was supposed to be a scenic drive into a half-assed speedrun. At this point, my gameplay consisted of grabbing quests, letting my pet handle the dirty work, and spending the earnings on gambling. Because what would a game be without gambling? In Fate, similar to other ARPGs, there is a vendor who sells gear with randomized modifiers that you can't see until you buy, as well as an enchanter who can modify your gear with a chance of it getting cursed, or in my case, most of the time do nothing at all. As a result of these 2 money sinks, my cash stack never stayed that high. But I think this is what the game wanted me to do, as there didn't seem to be anything to encourage me to save my money. Considering this is probably the most kid-oriented ARPG I've ever played, probably should have taught better money management, but as an adult, I wasn't complaining. I loved to gamble. Outside of the cartoony aesthetic, the game was more serious than I remembered. Not a huge amount of humor in the writing or dungeon design in general. All the monsters were just iconic D&D inspired things such as intellect devourers, dragons, and griffins. And at this point, my impressions of the game were that it was just a simpler Diablo. The pet transformation system was the main unique aspect that should have been more compelling, but I got the best fish first try. Another unique aspect was the death mechanic. Rather than one set option, on death, the player is given 3 choices to choose between. A loss of XP and faith, and you res on the spot. A loss of gold, and you res randomly on a nearby floor. And then the third option, where the gold drops where you died, and you res back in town. While I appreciated being given a choice, I almost exclusively gave up the small amount of gold to res on a nearby floor. If I had been more diligent with like preemptive town portals, maybe the third option would have been more appealing. But without any shortcut system to deeper floors, I was never going to choose that. I'm not sure the recommended level for the floors I was clearing, but at this stage, I began to suspect I was severely underleveled. I still wonder how much of the game would have been repeating floors and grinding levels if I didn't have my OP pet so early. I started to again focus on summons, hoping that if my pet did begin to fall off, the scaling on charm skill would allow me to still progress, as some summon spells gained a full level with each point in charm. The gameplay was becoming a bit monotonous. The visuals were becoming the only stimulation. Between the mass summons and defensive auras, a seizure warning was becoming necessary. I tried different summons to see if I could find my new carry, and I eventually settled on Ghost Valkyries, a caster who could also summon their own dragon as well, further adding to the overall claustrophobia in these tight dungeon halls. I found every offensive aura I could, and put all my eggs in the charm basket, but it still seemed that my summons were more of a distraction than DPS. The lack of modern quality of life features was most apparent when it came to spellcasting. The only keybinds available were F1 through F6, meaning outside of 6 spells, I had to go into the spell book to cast manually. At this point, having fully given up on summons, I decided to push tank build as far as I could. So at the very least, I would stop getting one-shot randomly by Shrike Juggernauts. I managed to get a combination of damage reflect and damage reduction gear from the Gambling Bender, and pump my strength high enough to meet any requirements. I was giving the enemy a taste of their own medicine, letting them see how it feels to not matter. For in this world, only one being truly matters, and that is my loyal companion and master, Shade. I had begun to regret that I hadn't put a single point into Vitality, but the power of damage reduction gear swiftly purged all that regret. It was at this point of the game that I finally realized that floor bosses were bigger red dots on the minimap and seemed to not scale like everything else on the floor, as they were one of the few things I could defeat quickly on my own. Sadly, I did end up having to give up a lot of my movement speed bonuses that I've been stacking till this point in favor of the damage reduction gear. But I was able to retain a lot of my clear speed by having my offset be dual-wielded speed weapons, allowing me to swap as necessary between tank and speed modes by just pressing tab. Because as in all games, I have a need for speed and I gotta go fast. By the end of the game, I managed 213% movement speed, not including my haste aura, and I was missing a cape with speed as well as gloves. So there was definitely room for improvement, but I'm satisfied with that for a finishing speed. As I reached the final floor of my campaign, I zoomed around and looked for the big red circle that would mark my final fight, the dreaded Roach Lord. I slashed away at the beast, even in the end trying to prove that this was my victory alone and I wasn't carried this whole time by my pet. Victory, absolute, was finally achieved. I ended the game at nearly 1.5 million gold, level 41, and a renown rank of Glorious, which is 14th out of the 20 total renown ranks. My total playtime was 4 hours and 30 minutes. I did get lucky on the main quest, as it can be on any floor between 40 to 50, and mine happened to be on 40. If you compare this playtime to a modern game, it feels quite short. I just finished God of War Ragnarok recently, and it took me nearly 40 hours. But this is a game that's meant to be able to be replayed, and attempting different builds is supposed to be a large part of the fun. Personally, for me, it definitely felt longer than 4.5 hours, and I can't see myself playing this character further or doing another run. Attack magic is one of the few things I didn't experiment with during this run. This is partially due to the ARPG category having been developed so heavily in the last couple decades. Modern ARPGs like Path of Exile and Diablo have a huge amount of quality of life and variety of choice, which enables the overall game loop to not feel as drum and repetitive. Now let's go over some pros and cons, starting with pros. It's a very new player-friendly game with an abundance of pop-up tips to teach about mechanics. The only mechanic I feel wasn't taught to me was Rage. I didn't realize that Rage was a mechanic till I accidentally hit spacebar near the end of the game. Another pro, the cartoon aesthetic and monster design hold up as someone who loved World of Warcraft and Fable as a kid. I've never minded my RPGs being cartoony. The tooltips on spells were very descriptive and gave exact numbers on scaling, which as an RPG fanboy, I appreciate immensely. And last but not least, the unique pet/fish system is something I wish had been copied by other games. Since reading Aragon, the idea of raising a companion to fight alongside has been a strong desire, and this game through leveling, gearing, and transforming your pet really scratches that itch. Now for cons. The simplicity of the game led to a feeling of monotony quicker than expected. The game became a loop of get 3 quests, clear the floor, check the merchants, rinse and repeat with little to distract me besides fishing. The combat outside of spells consisted of just holding left click. And overall, the game felt short term. Even with a retirement system that allows you to transfer one item to a new character, improving the item in the process, I didn't ever feel like I had a long-term goal, besides the main quest. And finally, the sounds. When I ran summons, I realized I had to mute the voice effects to avoid being spammed that my pet had grown in power.
Your pet has grown more skilled. Your pet has increased in power. Your pet has increased in power. It has increased in power.
And when I attempted melee, I realized I had to mute sound effects to avoid death by 1,000 cuts to my eardrums. This resulted in the game for the most part being silent. The one exception being the music, which I left on and enjoyed the whole run. Overall, while I can say I had fun, and I'm glad to have finished a game child me could only wish to own, sadly fate didn't quite hit the same as it did when I only had 30 minutes to play while my mom shopped. But I'm not done chasing this dragon yet. I'll keep betting on it being more than nostalgia and playing old games. I plan to start with games from my childhood, but if you have any recommendations of a game that's nostalgic to you and it would be good for the series, let me know in the comments. And I'll see you all next time on Beating My Inner Child.